On the southwest edge of England lies Gwenver Beach. While many who venture down this far south of London will drive past this beach on their way to the fishing village of Sennen, those who do make that turn are rewarded with a stretch of bright sand caressed by the Atlantic Ocean. This is where Jacob Cockle grew up and cut his teeth. Being in his natural element, he learned to swim before he could walk. Learning how to surf and quickly carving out a photography career once out of high school, Jacob loved to live life on the edge. Being described as a friend who attacked life at full throttle, traveling the world, exploring amazing places, and taking photos along the way, Jacob's existence was one of excitement and risk. Growing up in the outskirts of Penzance, he had the quintessential Cornish childhood. Running around the countryside, tanning on the beach, and surfing any wave he wanted. At a very young age, he struggled in school, skipping many days in school to hitchhike to the beach with his friends. Jacob's sister Grace was quite the opposite. Being the youngest of four, Jacob grew the strongest bond with Grace, who was only 3 years older than him. Looking up to her when he was only 16, she was diagnosed with a brain tumor and tragically passed away after several surgeries failed to remove the cancer. After her death, the family kept Grace's ashes in her favorite place in the house, the cupboard. Having requested to be kept there until another family member died, she said that she was afraid to be scattered somewhere alone. It would be 11 years later, following the death of her grandmother, where arrangements were finally made to scatter Grace's ashes. Being 17 when Grace died, this had a devastating impact on Jacob. Changing his view on life, he believed her energy transferred to him. His girlfriend Rachel reflected later by saying, "He thought as a young woman, Grace didn't do anything in life to deserve that. It was just cruel. He felt like he needed to live his life for her as well as for himself. Maybe that's why he lived life twice as hard." After Grace's death, Jacob's active energy was then shifted into his newly found obsession with photography. On his whiteboard in his room, Jacob laid out his ambition with a few quotes written down, reading, "I'm going to become a famous photographer and filmer. I will permit nothing to intervene with me doing so." This explicit goal went hand in hand with his newfound need to take risks. Being armed with a camera during each daredevil escapade, Jacob was prepared to do anything to get the best shots. Pushing himself to greater extremes, he taught himself to hold his breath for long periods of time so he could explore deeper depths of the ocean. Surfing closer to rocks and cliffs in the ocean, Jacob was skirting closer to deadly stunts each day. Gary Richards, a family friend of Jacob, went on to say, "He and his friends dared to surf where others did not, wanting to catch bigger waves and do bigger tricks. It was only a matter of time." Most notably was a stunt in 2008. During a massive storm that hit Newland Beach, numerous national newspapers showed photos of Jacob just moments before he was struck by a huge wave while surfing the increasingly dangerous swells right along the cliff face. Other than surfing dangerous waves, Jacob's other favorite stunt was to throw himself from tall buildings into the water below, such as the 3-story Abbey Warehouse, moving up to the Bosun's Locker nightclub in Penzance. After he jumped off this 4-story building, he had to be rescued from the harbor below. Receiving multiple police warnings for these jumps, nothing could deter Jacob from achieving his dreams. With the help of his friends and family, by his early 20s, Jacob was an accomplished photographer. Winning awards from National Geographic and the Sunday Times in England, he was a regular contributor for several surf magazines, having provided photos for several cover shots. While most of his pictures featured the sea, his most prized photo was a shot of fishing boats returning to port in a large swell. This photo won a competition to appear on posters in the London Underground. Winning several other contests that afforded them fancy stays in hotels, all of the money that came his way was spent on more photography gadgets, and by all accounts, Jacob was making it as a photographer. He sought out new experiences and wanted to capture them all with his camera. One of those new experiences was close to home. Offering a perfect combination of excitement and visual art, Jacob set his eyes on a whirlpool that appeared only a few times a year in Haley Harbor. A quirk of Victorian engineering, this drainage system was devised to stop the harbor from silting up with sand. Water would be stored in a pool at high tide, and once the tide retreated, it was released back into the harbor, washing away the leftover sand in the pool. Pulling out through a tunnel underneath the concrete walkway, the water moving through the tunnel would sometimes cause a whirlpool to form just above the tunnel entrance. The swift swirling vortex appealed to Jacob and enticed him every time he saw it. Eventually coming up with the idea to film it for a YouTube video, he ignored the warning signs placed around the sluice and jumped into the water. Taking those videos and posting several of them on YouTube, they were watched millions of times and earned him tens of thousands of likes and comments. Almost a full year passed before another whirlpool returned in late May of 2013. Artist David Rain, who had collaborated with Jacob in the past, was in his living room when he saw his friend running towards the house. The 28-year-old Jacob was excited, already wearing his wetsuit and clutching his camera. Talking with David, he agreed to film him as he swam around the whirlpool, teasing the power of the suction. By the time David made it to the harbor, Jacob was already in the water and was wearing a rubber horse's head. This prop, he thought, would make the video more eye-catching on YouTube. Having already shot a lot of footage, Jacob wanted to make the most of it and get all he could. David filmed from the walkway as the whooping Jacob swirled around the whirlpool's edge. Calling out to Jacob, David yelled, "It looks like a powerful one." Shouting back, Jacob said, "It's fine now because it's so deep, but when I first got in, it was much scarier." He then let the whirlpool carry him around and around again, and as it caught Jacob, it tugged him down, but he was able to avoid this by swimming backwards. He then asked David to pass him a GoPro attached to a short pole, as Jacob wanted to get some underwater shots of the whirlpool before exiting. Handing him the camera, Jacob dived back down. As David watched, after a few too many moments, Jacob did not reappear. David then began to worry. He called his friend's name and ran across to the other end of the walkway, where the tunnel that causes the whirlpool flows into a pool. He asked a fisherman if he had seen anything come through, but he hadn't. There was a grill in the ground through which he could see the water churning through the tunnel below, but there was no sign of Jacob. David then ran back and forth, and then he saw him. At the end of the 15-foot tunnel, Jacob emerged as the tunnel spat him out. He was then floating in the water face down, and David waded out to him, but he knew it was too late. Now yelling out to the fishermen nearby to call for the authorities, David and another passerby began to give CPR to Jacob as the rescue workers arrived on scene and took over. Jacob was then airlifted to the Royal Cornwall Hospital, where he was later pronounced dead. His mom Carolyn was contacted and she came to the hospital in complete shock to identify her son. She was so shook that she could not even cry. By the time she got home, her house was full of people showing respect and mourning Jacob. Remaining this way for days until Jacob's funeral, the church they chose was not even large enough to accommodate all the people who wished to attend. In the end, Jacob died just 1 week before his sister Grace's ashes were to be spread with their grandmother's. All 3 of their ashes were spread together in a field in Gwenver, where they will rest for eternity. A year after Jacob's death, the drainage system in Haley Harbor, which led to the formation of the whirlpool, was altered in a way that eliminated it altogether. That is the story of Jacob Cockle. If you made it this far, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing.